All of East Asia was stunned by Vietnam's tactics, as it single-handedly seized control of a remote reef from Malaysia. Dear viewers, welcome back to the latest broadcast of the program Top Secret. Ladies and gentlemen, do not mistake the conflict in the South China Sea as merely a direct confrontation between two sides. Vietnam and China are neighboring countries. However, Vietnam must constantly strive to protect its territorial sovereignty. Not only brotherly nations in ASEAN, but most notably Malaysia, a country that once dared to invade our nations and Bang Island in history. So how did the confrontation between Vietnam and Malaysia unfold with specific developments? What method did we use to reclaim this sacred sea and islands of our fatherland? It all began with the situation in the Spratly Islands in the early months of 1978. Very complex, especially the aircraft's flight path reconnaissance activities. Ships from the Philippines, Malaysia, Hong Kong, and China were present at many islands. In response, the resolution of the Navy Party Committee clearly stated, urgent concentration of all efforts is necessary. The entire military focused its utmost strength on combat readiness, determined to defeat the enemy. The forces achieved victory from the very first battle, firmly protecting the sea and the two sacred archipelagos of the fatherland. Alongside the mission of combat readiness to protect sovereignty, Regiment 146 also urgently organized and arranged its forces. In early March 1978, Colonel Sao An Dang went to the island to hold it according to the planned strategy. At that time, he was a lieutenant colonel, directly commanding a unit from the forces of Regiment 146 and Regiment 83. Naval engineers along with the Water Commando Squad of Brigade 126 moved on ship HQ 601. They went to the Spratly Islands to concentrate forces, assess the situation, and prepare for the landing on Bang Island. At 2000 on March 10, 1978, the entire landing squad urgently deployed construction and combat readiness to defend the island. After 20 days of marching, while the forces were on ship Sao 80, Group 128 commanded by Captain Vu Zan Hua. On March 30, 1978, Lieutenant Colonel Sao An Dang and 31 soldiers landed and carried out the mission to hold Phan Vin Island. This research also contributed to supporting units and organizations in building forces for island protection and defense. According to Colonel Sao An Dang's recollection of the first days at Bang Line Kiln, there was always the presence of an admiral. Admiral Van Quang, commander of the Navy. Just before that, Commander Van Quang himself directly assigned the task to Regiment Commander Sao An Dang. The outside world had long been eyeing it. If we did not quickly occupy it, we feared it would be taken by Chinese or Malaysian soldiers. He instructed that since Chinese ships were operating continuously, we must secure it at night and conduct landings during the day. They opened fire, then charged fiercely to retake the position, while our ships were no match for them. As predicted, just after our military occupied it that night, the next morning Malaysian warships immediately mobilized to the area. That morning, while digging trenches, we even discovered a sovereignty marker erected by the old Saigon regime. They had stationed troops there long ago but did not maintain a garrison, likely due to the harsh weather conditions. Colonel Sao An Dang stated that both China and Malaysia had desires to occupy Bang Shoal. But they were still one step behind us. On the morning of March 11, 1978, Malaysian warships approached Bang waters. The enemy aggressively aimed their artillery threateningly, but our troops remained calm and continued digging trenches composedly. At that time, our transport ship was adrift, and all weapons on board had been transferred to the island. Even though we were just infantry, we were fully prepared with total dedication, shared Colonel Sao An Dang. At Bang, in November 1978, the Malaysian Navy deployed warships to surround this island for 11 days and nights. But with steadfast resilience holding the position, our troops forced the enemy ships to retreat from the area. The collective of the island and island chief Min Tu were later awarded the Combat Merit Medal. In April 1978, Ship HQ 501 along with a squad from Regiment 146 under Comrade Kai's charge joined the formation. Due to inadequate infrastructure conditions, the squad withdrew to the mainland in May 1978. In late 1986, the Philippines intensified reconnaissance activities in the Spratly Islands using both aircraft and ships. There were reconnaissance warships operating from the Tay River to the fishing boat area. Malaysia deployed 2 survey ships operating 7 to 10 nautical miles from Mbang Island to survey channels and build a pier at Chiman Island, deploying forces to occupy Kiu Nua Shoal and Kivan Shoal. The Navy assessed that foreign forces might occupy additional islands, so it was necessary to quickly organize forces to hold positions on sampans. The policy of establishing and holding boat stations had long been proposed. A company was formed, including 3 platoons and 3 squads, pontoon, fully equipped with necessary weapons, ready to establish boat stations upon orders from Region 4 Command, organizing an engineering squad to coordinate with ships to maintain the boat stations, researching channels, determining buoy placement positions, and methods to fix buoys in position mid-island. Additionally, the holding force included a combat squad from Brigade 146 and a squad from Spratly Island, always ready to mobilize for combat when necessary. Pong Tong No. 1 was deployed to its position on January 10, 1987, and the remaining 2 Pong Tongs were deployed before January 20 of the same year. Food and supplies were stored to last for 3 months. Since January 5, 1987, ships of the 413th Naval Squadron, Region 4, have carried out guard and observation duties at Tuan Chai Island. Ship HQ 961 of the 125th Brigade and Ship HQ 674 of the 413th Squadron were responsible for towing and transportation. Meanwhile, warships of the 171st Brigade were always ready to maneuver and provide immediate support if combat occurred. The forward command post on Nam Yet Island, in the event of combat or tense situations, needed to be relocated to a remote location to ensure timely command operations. The requirement was to quickly maneuver at sea and conduct an amphibious landing on the island. The command post was arranged on Ship HQ 961, under the responsibility of Comrade Le Van Tu and Comrade Sao An Dang, enduring hardship to protect the islands. In February 1987, Ship HQ 613 was dispatched to replace Ship HQ 614 so that the latter could return to base. 2 commanders of Region 4 came to replace the 2 colonel secretaries and returned to the mainland to report the situation to the Naval Command. The military service decided to capture the boat camp on the morning of March 5, 1987. Pong Tong No. 01, the reserve force of the 146th Brigade, was secretly brought to the reef. The troops hoisted the red flag with a yellow star on the Pong Tong cabin, an action affirming Vietnam's sovereignty over Chim Island, the first island in the boat camp cluster. Vietnam is performing protection and management duties in the Spratly Islands. In 1987, the 83rd Naval Engineering Regiment completed construction work on Tuan Chai Island and several other projects on the island. During the boat camp deployment, Malaysian aircraft continuously flew back and forth, even flying so low that the printed letters on the aircraft body were clearly visible. Colonel Sao An is reminiscing. He recounted that during the guard duty period, he served as captain in late 1986. Comrades reported Chinese fishing boats appearing around all the islands. He immediately radioed the mainland, requesting that someone who knows Chinese be sent to the Spratlys immediately. He recalled that day, upon detecting Chinese fishing boats moving close to the island, he ordered the ship to approach and all crew members to be ready for duty. The Chinese ship, seeing our ship approaching, immediately had people come on deck, stringing lines to dry clothes, pretending it was a normal sea voyage. Which country? Specifically, where in China? It's the Guangxi Province Fishing Cooperative. I was sure this was a Chinese ship, so I asked the interpreter to speak slowly. This island is Vietnamese territory. The islands are under Vietnam's sovereignty. We demand you leave this area immediately. As soon as he finished speaking, 5 small motorboats sped over and approached the ship's side. On each boat was a young man around 19 or 20, with fair skin and handsome features. Colonel Dang recalled. He continued, I asked these men who they were and where they came from. Where our ship landed, our fishermen often fish right in the lagoon. They have to fish using live bait and sell it at a fairly high price. And he showed me the fishing rod. At that point, I exposed them bluntly. Don't lie. What kind of fishermen have such fair skin? You are Chinese Marines, here on a reconnaissance mission. Fishing line. The guy in charge of the ship fell silent, bowed his head, pulled the 5 buoys onto the deck, and then disappeared. Colonel Sao An Dang continued. Besides the confrontation between Vietnam and Malaysia, the Inbang tournament also witnessed several other notable clashes. And the main reason for these clashes is the overlapping maritime and continental shelf area between Vietnam and Malaysia. This area covers about 2,800 square kilometers, formed by the continental shelf boundary announced by the Saigon government in 1971, and the continental shelf boundary announced by Malaysia in 1979. That difference exists thanks to Saigon. Based on the distance from Hanoi Island, 6.5 nautical miles from the mainland, Vietnam considered this factor when determining the baseline, while Malaysia ignored the island's existence. In May 1992, Vietnam and Malaysia signed an agreement on joint exploration and exploitation in the overlapping sea area, assigning oil companies from both sides to sign commercial agreements and conduct joint exploration and exploitation, then share the products. The delimitation of the overlapping area will be resolved later, while oil and gas cooperation between the two sides is still progressing favorably. Additionally, the joint development area between Thailand and Malaysia covers 7,250 square kilometers, of which 800 square kilometers involves Vietnam. The three countries agreed to jointly resolve issues in this area, and the first meeting was held in February 1998. The second round is scheduled for the latter half of 1998 to discuss the possibility of joint exploitation in the overlapping area. Between Vietnam and Malaysia, there is also a sovereignty dispute over the Spratly Islands, stemming from Malaysia's claim to the southern part of the archipelago. And in fact, during 1993-1994, Malaysia deployed troops to occupy 3 submerged reefs in the southern Spratly Islands. The US, China, Japan, the Vietnamese government, and the Malaysian government have repeatedly affirmed that all disputes between the two countries will be resolved through peaceful negotiations. However, no matter how justified, Malaysia's presence in the Spratly Islands is an act of illegal invasion. Because Vietnam's sovereignty over the Paracel and Spratly Islands has been affirmed since ancient times. Throughout history, Vietnam has undergone many wars against foreign invaders. Most of the nation's ancient documents from that period were destroyed by the invaders, with the intent to erase Vietnamese culture for easier assimilation. However, the official historical documents preserved to this day are sufficient to prove the long-standing historical sovereignty of the Vietnamese people. Regarding the Hoang Sa and Trong Sa archipelagos, this is entirely consistent with international customs and laws on the establishment and affirmation of territorial sovereignty. Vietnam's Hoang Sa and Trong Sa archipelagos are 2 archipelagos consisting of many small coral islands and rocks, located in the middle of the East Sea. Currently, these 2 archipelagos are the focus of a complex dispute among several countries bordering the East Sea. Regarding the resolution of territorial sovereignty disputes, international law has established a fundamental principle for establishing territorial sovereignty, which is the principle of effective occupation. Accordingly, a state must exercise its state power substantially, continuously, and peacefully over that territory. This principle has been applied by many countries and international judicial bodies to resolve a series of territorial sovereignty disputes worldwide. Applying this principle of international law to the case of the Hoang Sa and Trong Sa archipelagos, historical evidence and legal grounds both affirm that Vietnamese states throughout various periods have exercised sovereignty continuously and effectively over these 2 archipelagos for hundreds of years. To be precise, Vietnamese states throughout historical periods have continuously exercised and affirmed their sovereignty here. At least since the 17th century, when these 2 archipelagos were not under the sovereignty of any country. Since then, Vietnam has continuously exercised and affirmed its sovereignty over the Hoang Sa and Trong Sa archipelagos peacefully. The historical evidence that Vietnam has collected is abundant, despite going through many prolonged periods of war. Therefore, many ancient Vietnamese texts have been lost and are not preserved to this day. However, the materials preserved to this day and official historical records still provide sufficient basis to affirm Vietnam's sovereignty over the Hoang Sa and Trong Sa archipelagos. Vietnamese maps from the 17th century have recorded these 2 archipelagos with the name Bai Cat Vang, Golden Sandbanks, and incorporated them into the district of Bin Sun, Quang Ngai Prefecture. Thien Nam Tu Kai Lo Du Tu, Phu Bien Tap Luc, compiled in 1776, Dai Nam Thuc Luc Tien Bien and Chin Bien, compiled from 1844 to 1848, Dai Nam Nyat Thong Kai, compiled from 1865 to 1875. The Nguyen dynasty's official documents from 1802 to 1945 all have records about the Hoang Sa and Trong Sa archipelagos, such as the vast golden sandbanks in the East Sea, and the state dispatching the Hoang Sa fleet to exploit these archipelagos. In addition, many ancient foreign books and maps also recognize the Hoang Sa and Trong Sa archipelagos as belonging to Vietnam's sovereignty. The peak of Vietnam's declaration and establishment of sovereignty over the Hoang Sa and Trong Sa archipelagos was in 1816. When King Gia Long sent troops to the Hoang Sa archipelago, planted the Vietnamese flag, and declared sovereignty. It should be added that for a long time, the Vietnamese people have always viewed the Hoang Sa and Trong Sa archipelagos as a continuous strip of islands. The Hoang Sa and Trong Sa archipelagos, with the Hoang Sa archipelago having established the Hoang Sa and Bac Hai naval teams to exercise sovereignty and exploit resources from these two archipelagos. Regulations on the selection of members, reward regimes, and benefits for the Hoang Sa fleets. And the Nguyen lords organized the Hoang Sa and Bac Hai teams to exercise sovereignty and exploit these two archipelagos. The procedures for selecting talents, reward regimes, and benefits for the teams were clearly stipulated by the state. These teams were maintained and operated continuously through various periods, from the Nguyen lords period, 1558 to 1783, to the Tay Son dynasty, 1786 to 1802, and then the Nguyen dynasty. In 1815, the Nguyen court sent General Pham Quang An, Chao Phi Si Pham Van Nguyen, Pham Hu Nyat in the years 1834, 1835, 1836. Assigned to Hoang Sa to survey, measure the islands, draw maps, build temples, and erect sovereignty stels. After establishing domination over Indochina, the French colonialists, in the name of the Vietnamese state, continued to manage the two archipelagos. By dispatching warships to patrol to ensure security and prevent smuggling, the Japanese were allowed to mine guano on the islands. The ship de la Neston set sail to study oceanography, geology, and biology from 1930 to 1932. French naval warships in Coston, Alete, La Malique Sea, and de la Neston successively went to the Hoang Sa archipelago. In the early 1930s, France sent troops to station on the main islands of the Trong Sa archipelago. These activities were published in the official journal of the French Republic on July 26, 1933. In 1933, the Governor-General of Indochina issued a regulation annexing the Trong Sa archipelago to the administrative territory of Ba Ria province. France also separated the Hoang Sa archipelago from the district of Nam Gai province, annexed it to Thua Thien province, and sent a military unit to garrison there. After returning to Indochina, France demanded that the Republic of China Army withdraw from the islands they had illegally occupied. In 1946, France sent troops to replace the Republic of China Army and had the wireless meteorological station rebuilt. In 1951, at the San Francisco Conference in the United States, there was a proposal to add to the draft peace treaty, requiring the return of the Hoang Sa and Trong Sa archipelagos to China. The conference rejected the proposal regarding the two Hoang Sa and Trong Sa archipelagos with an overwhelming majority of 46 votes in favor, 3 blank votes and 1 white vote. At the conference, Foreign Minister Tran Van Hu, leading the delegation of the national government of Vietnam, affirmed Vietnam's long-standing sovereignty over the two Hoang Sa and Trong Sa archipelagos without any objections or reservations from other countries. In 1956, France transferred the territory of South Vietnam to the government of the Republic of Vietnam. Subsequently, this government sent troops to take over those territories. Administratively, the two archipelagos were organized into one commune per archipelago and placed under a mainland district. At the same time, sovereignty stels and meteorological stations were also built. Since the 1950s, the situation in the Paracel and Spratly Islands has become increasingly complex. Taking advantage of the chaos following France's withdrawal from Indochina under the 1954 Geneva Accords. In 1956, China secretly sent troops to illegally occupy the eastern island group of Vietnam's Paracel Islands. The Republic of Vietnam government strongly protested. In 1959, Chinese soldiers disguised as fishermen landed on the western island group of the Paracel Islands. The Republic of Vietnam military detected, intercepted, and detained 82 Chinese fishermen. Regarding the western island group of the Paracel Islands, the Republic of Vietnam government continued to exercise administrative control until 1974. In 1974, China used air and naval forces to occupy the western part of the Paracel Islands. The Republic of Vietnam government strongly condemned this act of aggression by China. In 1975, the Republic of Vietnam government collapsed, and the People's Navy of Vietnam took over entirely. The islands in the South China Sea managed by the Republic of Vietnam Armed Forces. After national reunification, the Vietnamese state continued to assert its sovereignty over the Paracel and Spratly Islands. Issued numerous state administrative documents, established the Paracel Island District and Spratly Island District, and improved administrative management of these archipelagos. An obvious fact is that until 1988, China had never had any presence in the Spratly Islands. On March 14, 1988, China used force to illegally occupy several islands in Vietnam's Spratly Islands. Under the light of international law, Vietnam has ample historical evidence and legal basis to assert its long-standing and continuous sovereignty over the Paracel and Spratly Islands. The 1982 United Nations Convention on the Law of the Sea stipulates that coastal states have the right to enjoy continental shelf status for exploration and resource exploitation. This is a specific sovereignty, not dependent on conditions such as occupation, exploitation, or explicit declaration. Any arbitrary occupation by foreign countries, whether by force or not, is illegal and lacks legal validity. Geographically, Tri Ton Island in the Paracel Islands is only 135 nautical miles from Quang Ngai, while Paracel Island is 160 nautical miles from the Vietnamese mainland. Therefore, the Paracel Islands lie within Vietnam's continental shelf, consistent with the provisions of the 1982 UNCLOS. Geologically, scientific studies confirm that the Paracel Islands are part of Vietnamese territory. Topographically, the seabed in the Paracel Islands area is essentially a submerged plateau, a continuous extension from the Vietnamese mainland. The Spratly Islands are no exception. In terms of geology and seabed topography, the islands of the Spratly Archipelago are a natural extension of the continent from the Vietnamese mainland into the sea. Moreover, the Tu Chin Bank and the Spratly Islands are only 150 to 220 nautical miles from the Vietnamese mainland and entirely lie on Vietnam's continental shelf. An objective requirement for all countries operating in the South China Sea is to strictly comply with the general legal provisions of the international community. Among these, many coastal states in the South China Sea have devoted considerable effort to building and developing. The 1982 United Nations Convention on the Law of the Sea is the legal basis for exercising sovereignty and sovereign rights over national maritime zones, including internal waters, territorial seas, exclusive economic zones, and the continental shelf. Coastal states in the South China Sea have the obligation to respect the sovereignty and sovereign rights